Hi folks, this is Jason Sage with Jegas LLC. This is our second video on Jegas Edit, version 0.62. That's the version we're on at the time of this recording. And this is a continuation of the previous video where we covered things like column selection mode, column data entry mode, and search and replacing multiple lines of text, or what we call the special search and replace, because there's some differences in how that works from standard editors, so we wanted to cover that. Now we're going to go into the configuration of the Jegas text editor. We've already talked about the fact that in version 0.62 we have stock syntax, we have a stock theme so that you get color out of the box, and we talked about how in previous versions you would get black and white the second you opened the file until you went to the tools options area, which we're going to go to now. And so at least now with this version you get color immediately. So if you open up a C++ file, cascading style sheet, HTML, XML, what have you, you'll have color coding right out of the box. I wanted to go through the process of how you can configure a language for Jegas Edit using this options tools panel. To start with, we have the file extensions dialog or pane, and if you grab a language, you'll see the associated file extensions with that. If you highlight them, you'll notice that the delete file extension button comes up, so you can remove file extensions from a given language, and you can also add new ones just by typing them in, and you hit add, and there they are. And it's that easy. So I added the file extension and I'm going to delete it. And you can do that individually for each of the languages that are configured in your Jegas Edit. Now going over to the Languages tab, if you wanted to create a new language, we have this concept of a short name and a language description. The language description is pretty much what you would see in this list, and the language short name is what Jegas Edit uses internally to identify the language at hand. So I'm going to go through the process of adding a new language, and I'm going to add assembly language, and I'm going to say macro assembly x86, for example. This is how you add a new programming language. You can make up your own or whatever, languages that we don't have supported, what have you. I'm going to hit add new language, and there it is. Now Jegas Edit doesn't know anything about it other than that there's a mailbox, there's a slot for it, I guess you could say. Getting rid of a language is just as easy as removing file extensions. You can just highlight the language and hit delete, and everything goes away. The next pane we're going to go to is the editor pane. This actually is how you configure the behavior of this white area here in the editor. There's a lot of different things like block indenting, and there's a lot of options here, and we have a lot of this described in the help, so I won't cover all of them, but I want to make it clear that the editor pane is how you control the properties that are more or less global. In fact, in the configuration file they actually have the global, there's like it'll say like global dot edit, global dot color or something. It was referring to these because these are global options for the editor regardless of the language that you are currently editing in. So those are pretty easy to change. Changing the colors is easy as just selecting a color. You can even do custom. But let's move over to the syntax tab and go back to that macro assembly that we started to add. First of all, you pick, and this is actually this filter down here is in an odd spot, but real estate I was trying to get as much on the screen as I could, and some folks found this a little confusing, so I definitely want to point this out. When you're on the syntax tab, you have to go down here to this language filter, just like you did with file extensions, and you select the language that you want to work on. We're going to work on our macro assembler that we just added, macro assembly, and by clicking that, I now can see I have some options for the macro assembler language that we're just adding. You have three main categories here. We have colors and attributes, and that's pretty much what color the keywords are going to be, or functions or objects, and there's basically that's how you control what colors things are going to be. External commands is how you control what's going to happen when you click compile, run, save, and let's go through that real quick just a little bit, because this is for each language that you can have in Jegas Edit. You can have your own configuration for external commands. For compile, default, we actually put in I guess a bogus command here just to give you the idea. If we were doing assembler, if I was using macro assembler, I might put in MASM if it was in my file path. the %1 that you see here actually gets replaced with the file name that you're currently editing in Jegas Edit. The run option, you usually can get away with just the %1. What that does with this particular option, though, is it takes the name of the file that you're editing, but it removes the file extension, and then it fires it up that way. This works on Linux because in Linux there's typically not a file extension that says exe like there is in Windows. This works in Windows because if you fire a program name, let's say notepad.exe, but you ran it just by saying notepad, the operating system will run it even if you didn't type in the extension. It'll assume that you're trying to run an executable program. So this usually works just fine. So that's the only difference between compile, it's the actual file name, and in run, it's the file name without the extension when it runs it, because it assumes you've already compiled it. I'm sorry, it compiles it and then it runs it. Alright, so save when compiled or run. This is an option that allows you to make it so that when you do go to compile or run an application that you're editing, whether it forces you to save first or not. If you have this unchecked, Jegas Edit will actually create a temporary file, save that, compile that, and run that temporary file, so you don't have to save the source code you're working on. Now the user ones work the same way. They work the same way as the compile, more or less. Is that you pretty much have a caption for it, so it'll show up in these buttons. These yellow circles represent the user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's also you can get them from the run menu, which is right here behind, which I can't access right at this moment. But this is actually the command line, and you'll notice by default out of the box they all run Notepad, and they actually open up the file that you're actually working on. And the only reason we set these user ones up that way is so that if you clicked on them, you saw that they did something, and then hopefully that would, if you wanted to make it do something a little bit more desirable to your needs, because we can't imagine Notepad being a wonderful thing to go do with your source files if you're already in a nice syntax colored editor. But this way it gives a nice example, so you can actually replace this with anything you want, whether it's a browser, whatever it is. If you want to set up Google Chrome or something specifically, you can do all that in these user options here. Alright, syntax properties. This is where you are actually defining how the generic any highlighter, we have a highlighter in here called any, which allows you to customize and create your own programming language, like the macro assembly that we're on. It allows you to select different options, as well as putting keywords, the style of the comments, and like for example we have constants here. This is actually a list of constants you might have for the language that you're developing. Now there are certain buckets like constants, keywords, objects is another one. See, objects is another one with a list where you can put in these keywords, whatever they are. But if you have a language that doesn't have objects but it has some other kind of entity that you want to have a certain color, just pick one of the ones that is empty that you're not using. Like let's say right now objects, I want to put in objects. I don't know, maybe it's a macro definition or something I have. I can just put in my macro definitions, clear screen, and as long as I know that I put all my macros in the objects bucket for this language, when I'm setting the colors up here, if I scroll back up and go up to colors and then change the colors for objects, I know that all those macros are going to be the colors I set for my objects. So my point is that you can pretty much bend this thing to your will pretty easily just by understanding that you have your colors and what they're relating to, and then you actually have at the bottom you have your syntax properties, and you have the attributes that you're programming or customizing by adding keywords or whatever important function names. Okay, so that's pretty much how you teach Jegas Edit about a new language. And once you have your colors set, you can hit OK to try it out, or you can just click Save, which does the same thing as OK, but it actually writes it to disk and it saves that. It'll give you a dialog, tell you exactly where it saved the configuration file. And if I close this, there's also a thing here that says Open Config File Directly. So if you actually had already saved your configuration file, when you click this, you'll be able to actually edit that source code. It wasn't really designed to be human edited, but sometimes you might find it advantageous. Or it's also a quick way to get into the directory. This is just telling me I haven't saved my configuration yet. But it's also a quick way to get into the directory where your configuration is saved, so you can actually, with the little file open dialog, which would look something like this, you can just do something like rename your configuration file if you want to have multiple versions of it, or if you want to get creative that way. Well, that's the end of this particular video, and stay tuned for the next one, where we're going to try to cover some topics that we quite haven't touched on just yet, and we hope you enjoy using Jegas Edit. Have a good day.